Next seminar is going to be streamed live on YouTube, and I'm fully expecting it to be watched by many people around the world. To introduce the topic now, and some very special guests, please give a warm welcome from BBC Formula One, Lee Mackenzie.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mindshare and McLaren session here at the Cannes Lions Festival, and a very warm welcome to all of you also watching online, all around the world on Lions Live. Cannes is only a short drive along the coast from Monaco, which is, of course, one of the spiritual homes of Formula One racing. McLaren has dominated that Grand Prix over the decades, winning 15 times with a variety of world champions, from Mika Häkkinen to Alain Prost and, of course, Ayrton Senna. A few weeks ago, Monaco was taken over by Formula One once again. 22 of the world's fastest cars and drivers, all tearing up the streets at speeds of up to 160 miles per hour. The speed, bravery, success, and sometimes failure all combine to make the sport a unique global spectacle watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. Now, to begin proceedings here and to explain how Formula One can be applied to marketing, in a moment we'll hear from the brand director of McLaren Group, John Allert. But first, give me a hand in welcoming onto the stage the global CEO of Mindshare, Nick Emery.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I know we've got a lot of competition on a sunny day in Cannes. Mindshare and McLaren may seem like a transparent Cannes-style PR event, and in some ways it is. But there are some fundamental lessons that we can learn from McLaren about how they use data and how they adapt to data in real time. And that's critical to our business as we develop. And it's our ability to adapt to data and to create and distribute content in real time that will define success for this generation. For Formula One, it's all about data, and it's about the speed of action and reaction to that data. But there's one fundamental difference between McLaren and our business, and that is that the level of personal and corporate faith in data far surpasses our own. For both the individual driver and for the company, it really is a matter of life and death in terms of your trust and the feedback that you get from data and the actions you take as a result of that. There's a lot of buzz and talk in our business about data, about real-time marketing, and about what we can do with data. And essentially now we can map all humankind. Everything begins and ends in media, whether it's Walmart or 20th Century Fox or Arab Springs, everything is a medium. And increasingly, our brands, the brands we work with, their reputations go up and down on the stock market of social media. Yet, if you look at how we're structured, how we as a business have structured ourselves, we haven't fundamentally changed to react to that. We've added things on, we've bought companies, we've changed slightly and adapted slightly, but not fundamentally. We don't have the same live or die faith and trust in data that McLaren do. And that, to me, is the central issue of Cannes, how we change and adapt to data and technology. Because Cannes, essentially, now, is a data and technology festival, as much as a content one. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, these people dominate where once content alone dominated. And therefore, the central issue this week, and the central issue that I think we all grapple with, is how to marry the distribution of technology and content in real time. And that, to me, is the issue now, and what is largely a technology meeting. The implications from the agency side of that are profound. We have to fundamentally change our model. We have to use more of the Formula One techniques in terms of adaptation, in terms of our relief in data, to change our model completely. And the answer is probably not a media agency. The answer is probably not a traditional agency. In fact, the answer probably isn't an agency at all. It's probably a new kind of construct of teamwork. But it's a construct that works together to put data and social and mobile and T-commerce at the center of that operation. So yes, definitely about data. Data goes through as a thread through everything that we do. But data centered in real lives and real people that gives great insights and great results, because that's ultimately what the data is about. If you were to start an agency today, you'd probably start it on two core principles. One is to harness the huge power of television. Television certainly isn't dead. Television's bigger than television in terms of a cultural force. It no longer sits in that box. But to harness the power of television and then couple that with the addressability, the adaptability of a company like Amazon that can put hundreds of thousands of messages every minute. If you can harness those two elements, then your agency that you launched today would be a huge success. And that, I think, are the key trends that we are trying to grapple with and what we can learn so much from Formula One. So in terms of what we'll hear today, and the lessons for us, I think they are a number. They're about dynamic journeys. Certainly we know now that every individual is different. We have to target campaigns based on that individual level. But also for corporations, I think we have to change and adapt our identity and what we stand for almost as much and almost as often as a Formula One race car. And then thirdly, there's the dynamic journey of pitches. I mean, an average pitch now seems to last as long as a Formula One season with as many twists and turns. So our business is about that dynamism and about that change. It's about a connected approach, a different style of teamwork. It's a concept of nobody owning anything, but everybody owning everything and working together in a different definition of integration. Certainly new rules that are centered in adaptation. If you work in an agency or you work in our business, then change sits at the heart of your strategy anyway. But I think increasingly we have to be comfortable with a whole new level of ambiguity. Certainly about real time, certainly about real-time data. A lot of talk about that, and we'll learn how it really is how McLaren work and how they identify and how they make all their decisions. And we have to put that much more at the center of what we do, but clearly about real lives and to create great ideas. And fundamentally, finally, about the talent, about how you interpret that data, how you work together in a new and different team. So to see how that all comes together and how McLaren do that and their fundamental reliance on data that really, at the end, is all about winning and getting great results, it gives me great pleasure to introduce what I think is one of the world's foremost adaptive and data marketing companies, but also, in my opinion, the world's best Formula One company, McLaren.
I'm John Allert from McLaren, and firstly I'd like to thank you all for coming to this session on adaptive marketing, and thank you, Nick, for hosting us here, and thanks to Mindshare for hosting us here today at the Cannes Lions. Well, I think you saw unambiguously from that video that we are most definitely a Formula One team. We have Formula One at our heart. But I think, hopefully also as the video showed, we are very much a diversified, innovative technology group, which also has, within our business, other luxury aspects of what we do, from road cars through to high-end technologies. And we're going to talk to you a little bit more as we go through this session about how we've adapted our business to encompass those different technologies, those different business units and different business or industrial areas to evolve and adapt our business. Before we do that, though, I thought it would be worth talking to you about some of the principles that underlie our brand and our organization that have guided that evolution and that adaptation that we've undertaken through 50 years this year, being the anniversary of our formation back in 1963. I said in an interview a few weeks ago that we are unashamedly brand extremists, and that's very true. What do I mean by brand extremism? Well, I guess for us, the management of the McLaren brand is not traditional brand management. Our brand, to us, is not an inanimate third-party unit or item or asset to be managed. Because at McLaren, we are our brand. We live our brand every day. You see our brand continuously, either every 2 weeks on TV or driving down the road out here on the Croisette. So for us, brand extremism is really fundamentally at the heart of what we do, but it informs just not what we've adapted into, it informs very much for us culturally how we've adapted and why we've adapted in the way that we have. Now, if you think that we're all introverted number crunchers, let me correct you. We are believers in both magic and science. Ron Dennis, our chairman, often talks about the McLaren brand being 80% NASA and 20% Disney. And that's very much at the cornerstone of what we are, whether you visit our building, whether you drive one of our cars, or whether you see our Formula One team in action. But unlike a brand like Disney, we've had to evolve and adapt in our ability to tell stories. Telling stories, obviously, is very much the currency of today. And as we adapt and evolve, so too are we having to improve our efficiency and our ability to tell those stories in a way that's not just cohesive and respects the brand as our central organizing principle, but works simultaneously in regions as diverse as China, Russia, Brazil, Europe, and everywhere else. Some of you in the audience might remember these guys. Maybe not traditional role models, and I'm not suggesting for a second that they're role models to us. But the one thing that we do share as a principle is a complete disdain for inertia. Because in the world of technology, and particularly in branded technology, to not innovate, to not challenge, to simply stand still is akin to death. And for us, we're never, ever satisfied until we've iterated, until we've innovated and adapted every piece of technology, every process that we have in the organization to the absolute nth degree. But one of the things that we need to do simultaneously is be ambitious. Being ambitious for us is about setting targets and surpassing those targets. We look to benchmarks both traditional and non-traditional in the way that we do that. As the old adage goes, just as many great believers and dreamers have done in the past, whether they be the famous Walt Disney, whether they be JFK or other visionaries, without a target, without an aim, business is nothing. Brands cannot be built without an aim. And the old adage says, if you aim at nothing, there's nothing surer than you'll meet your target. So for us, coming first sounds very obvious, but coming first for us is not literally about always crossing the line first. For us, it is a central organizing principle. It's about being proud of what we do and how we do it, and always surpassing our goals. whether that be in the development of carbon fiber technology. We were the first ever Formula One team to race an all-carbon fiber Formula One car. We were the very first brand to launch an all-carbon fiber supercar, the iconic McLaren F1, back in the early 90s. And most recently, with the launch of the McLaren 12C supercar, the first to create a production-specific all-carbon fiber monocoque, which is now racing in GT as well as being seen on the roads throughout southern France. But adapting is also about adapting your intellectual property. And for us, both codifying that intellectual property and then commercializing that intellectual property is a key part of how we're adapting as a business. When the elite bike manufacturers, Specialized, came to us and asked us to work on a carbon fiber bike frame, we initially turned them down. They had what they thought were quite lofty ambitions in terms of weight saving in the carbon fiber frame that would compete for them on the European and World Tour as their most elite frame. They tried to take 2 to 6% of the weight out of that frame, and only after they convinced us that they had exhausted every possible means by which they could achieve that, we thought we might have a go. Needless to say, we put our composites engineers from the Formula One team on that project and stripped an incredible 15% of the weight of that frame out. And it was no huge surprise to us then that in the very same year, competing on that frame, Mark Cavendish managed to win the green jersey in that year's Tour de France. But we do like winning. Unashamedly, we like winning. I'll ask you to cast your mind back to 1988. 1988 was a frustrating and bad year for us. Why is that, you might say? Well, we had two iconic, fantastic drivers. We had the great Alain Prost, and we had the inimitable Ayrton Senna. We had possibly the best Formula One car ever created, the McLaren MP44. However, we only won 15 out of the 16 races that year. In one of those races, Ayrton Senna had a clear lead over the rest of the field, and it was in lapping one of the back markers that he unfortunately clipped that car, came off, and was stranded on one of the guards on the side of the track. 15 out of 16 races, almost the impeccable record. The reason for my telling you that is the principle underneath our business is that we must win each and every race. If we come second, we've got work to do. Now, some people also think as a brand, as an organization, we're a tad obsessive. You might think 271.5 versions of an engineering nut might be slightly obsessive. Maybe you're right. And in our game, weight is the enemy of speed. And by way of example, one of the things that we did in developing our 12C road car was to strip all of the weight out of that car. One of the ways that we did that was something as simple but innovative as bundling electronic wiring in a hexagonal format, which gave us greater space efficiency, greater ability to put more electronic wiring through the same space, and in so doing, engineered microns of grams out of that car. Extremism, you might say. But that extremism is not only always about engineering. It's not always simply about technology. As I said before, we do dare to dream. We do look for inspiration that is beyond engineering and beyond science. And we often look to the world of nature. Now, whether that's looking at the speed and aquatic efficiency of something like a swordfish, whether it's looking at insect life, looking at the braking capabilities, for example, of a dragonfly, or the propulsion abilities of a flea, we look for that innovation, we look for that inspiration in all sorts of different non-traditional areas. But most fundamentally, if I can leave you with anything, it is this, that the central organizing principle of McLaren is fundamentally our culture. As our chairman, Ron Dennis, says, if you cut a McLaren person, they will bleed McLaren. And by that, I mean that each and every person is living the brand each and every day. And only in doing that, and only uniting a workforce, can you truly adapt a business in a cohesive way that will endure and future-proof yourself. Thank you.
Nick, John, thank you very much for your thoughts. Well, now to add his unique perspective, I'd like to welcome to the stage a man who can claim to be both the most successful Formula One team principal in the history of the sport and one of Britain's most visionary and entrepreneurial businessmen. Please welcome onto the stage the chairman of McLaren Group and of McLaren Automotive, Ron Dennis. From John and from Nick about adaptation and some of what that means, not only on the track, but also in media. How have you applied that to all your businesses over the years?
Well, first of all, good afternoon. Secondly, in coming to Lee's question, you know, it's hard to follow someone as linguistic as these guys, and John knows our business very well and our values and principles. I think that the few points he made there, a couple of others that he didn't. I think one of the things that one must remember as you power through life is that to be different, you can't for 1 minute try and duplicate what someone does. If you duplicate it, the best you're going to be is a mirror image. And a mirror image is going to give you a competitive advantage. And even though maybe when you take that photograph of that image, there's only milliseconds passed before you're looking at it. Simple fact is you're behind the game. The start, straight away, you're behind the game. So you have to be pioneering in how you think, but you also have to be appreciative that if you stand still, you know, I mean, I was looking at some of the notes that were written for me, and there was a passive thing about if you don't change and you don't adapt, then you fall behind. I'm far more brutal, I think, as a company. If you don't adapt and change, you die. I mean, you fail. And if you look at our business, it's a very, very competitive world. 106 Formula One teams have come and gone in the period in which I've been involved in Formula One, which is somewhat over 30 years. And these teams, literally, they get created, there's huge sums of money, and they fail. And they fail because they just don't understand the fundamental principles of being in a sport that doesn't take prisoners. You have to enter Formula One with the concept of being competitive. And there's a very big differentiation between competitiveness and competing. When you compete, you participate. To be competitive, you have to adapt and change, and our speed of development is just mind-blowing. We're making in season a new component designed, developed, and manufactured and going onto the car every something like 12.5 minutes. So that requires huge resource, both fiscal and engineering-wise. But you know, this is a world where your failures are so apparent to everybody. You can't escape them. Butcher Baker, guy cuts your hair, he's immediately, you know, you failed again. They don't say it so brutally, but basically that's the message. So it doesn't take prisoners, and it's a sport that you know, requires you to be just the best at everything. And again, being the best is challenging. Being the best consistently year after year is extremely challenging.
McLaren has achieved so much and ticked off so many impressive things over the years. How can you spot what is a good idea and maybe what should be best left? What constitutes a good idea?
Well, first of all, we don't lack ideas. I mean, we've got best 2,250 people work in the organisation, and many of them have, as part of their employment, the need to come up with ideas. Obviously, easy to think about engineers, aerodynamicists, material scientists, mathematicians. I mean, it's endless, the level of expertise we have available, but you're expected to have it if you're in the marketing department, if you're in our agency, or if you're in the electronics company. You're expected to come up with ideas all the time. The important thing is, which are the good ones? The first thing is we just toilet everything if it doesn't pass one fundamental test, which is, can we be realistically the best in the world at it? If we don't believe we can be the best in the world at something, we don't even embrace it. And strangely, that test excludes so many things, and you then get sort of nucleus of really good ideas, and then you've got to determine how are you going to execute, what's the cost, et cetera, et cetera. And as we diverse, because we are a Grand Prix team, but actually we're a technology company that's got a Formula One team. That's really what we are. And as we try and monetize the technologies that come out of our motor racing programs, because we spend vast sums, 200 odd million a year, most of which is going in on R&D, and I'm talking sterling, not euros. Out of that comes lots of things that we can exploit. And of course, you go for you could say the low fruit first. You start making production cars, very challenging, massive competitively, a very competitive business in which to enter. And then you start looking, we start to look at things that our suppliers weren't very good at. Early on, electronics were awfully unreliable in motor racing, so we created our own electronics company 25 years ago. And now every Formula One car, every IRL car, every Can-Am car, as the video showed, uses our electronics. We are the global, we're world leaders, and we're not against the lightweights. It's against Bosch, it's against Pi, it's against Lucas, it's against all the big players. And we can look at that as a classic example of something we said, we can be the best, and let's get focused on it. And there's a lot of points, a lot of things up there that we demonstrated we can be the best if we apply the right expertise.
Okay, Ron, we'll talk more in just a moment if you'd like to join the guys on the seats. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Dennis. Now, one of the most exciting parts to Formula One is the pit stop, where a group of highly skilled individuals combine to make the perfect team, making slight adaptations as and when they need, and those adaptations can quite simply be the difference between success and failure.
We hear the radio call for the car coming in. But when you go out, your heartbeat's gone through the roof. You will make a mistake if you rush. We practiced so many times over the weekend. There's massive responsibility. When it all goes great and everything goes smoothly, it feels good. Essentially, you've got a car coming at you at 60 kilometres an hour. Deep breathing, and try and keep as calm as you possibly can.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the stage the 2009 Formula One World Champion and Vodafone McLaren Mercedes driver, Jenson Button. He's very subtle. That wasn't a great entrance or anything, was it? How can you beat that? Jenson, just seeing the guys at your car there, they're not the only ones working for you during the Grand Prix. You've got people in the garage. Even when you're in China and Australia, he has people working back at the MTC in Woking. 6.5 billion pieces of data go from Jenson's car during a Grand Prix. Are you not in danger of information overload?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Not really. I think, you know, it's through experience, but also there is so much going on back at the factory, back at the MTC, and even at the circuit. There's so much going on behind the scenes. But there's only one person that I actually talk with while I'm driving the Formula One car, my engineer, Dave. And that's the way it has to be. Otherwise, you get too confused, yeah, because there's so much going on behind the scenes. But it's the way that's worked for us, and I think I think that's why we've made some very good calls in the past, and especially with strategy and pit stops and tyre strategies throughout the race.
You're a driver who's known throughout the paddock and in the world of motorsport who can adapt to change pretty quickly, whether it be weather or strategy. We won't tell anyone. What's your secret?
Well, it is about feel, and it's not about what you see out on the circuit. It's about what you feel with the conditions through your bum in the car and through the steering wheel. And I think that's a failure of a lot of drivers, especially coming into the sport. You know, you see a bit of water on the circuit and you immediately think, well, it's wet then. You've got to go through the feel of what you feel through the car. And that's helped me a lot. And also, it's not all down to you. I mean, I don't know if it's raining on the other side of the circuit. I need the team to be on it, on the case, ready to act and to talk to me and talk me through every situation. And that's the best way to get the best result.
I suppose one example of that would be in Canada, which turned into what felt like the world's longest Formula One Grand Prix, which you went on to win. And that was incredible. I think it was 6 hours and just the most bizarre weather that we've ever seen.
Yeah, 2011 was a pretty special race, Montreal. Started 7th and ended up last twice. I crashed with my teammate, which is normally the thing you really do not want to do. And then I crashed with a world champion, Fernando Alonso. Got a puncture, 5 pit stops, a drive-through penalty, and I was last with about 25 laps to go. And we came through and won on the last lap of the race. So a very, very special weekend. And I think a lot of that was, you know, however difficult it gets, you just can never give up. You can never give up. And you've got to look for every situation. You've got to run through every scenario that could possibly happen in that race and be ready for it.
And that's a perfect definition of adaptation. Jenson, if you'd like to take a seat beside the others. We've covered so many different things. To finish off, though, we're just going to have a chat and try and pull everything together so you can see how it works both on and off the circuit. John, we've touched upon how much data is used in Formula One, but there might be a lot of people out there who are scratching their heads thinking it was just simply the fastest cars and drivers.
Well, it's not necessarily the case. This picture you probably won't be familiar with because it's a fairly low-key part of our organisation. This is our mission control, and this is where we have a number of very, very high-end engineers, strategists, meteorologists, all sorts of people crunching all sorts of data. But for us, it's very clear that so-called big data is dead. So for data to be effective in our world, that data needs to be agile, needs to be organic, but most importantly, it also needs to be very people-friendly. There's no point having shed loads of data if you can't act on that data and see and feel, as Jenson said, what's happening with that data in real time and what the implications of the decisions coming out of that really are.
Jenson, you mentioned about simple instructions coming from one person. Just looking at a picture of your steering wheel, that doesn't look the most simple of steering wheels.
It doesn't, does it? No. And as you might see, we've got letters instead of actually saying what that switch does. So that we're trying to keep a few things secret from our competitors. So there's a lot to learn, yes, when you start driving at McLaren. But you know, this is like second nature to me with the switches and. You know, obviously I know what I have to do. Every corner of the lap you might be changing a switch because you'll change the differential. You can change it on the entry to a corner, the apex, the exit. You're playing around with the kinetic energy recovery system, with the harvesting under braking, and also using the boost on the exit. So there's a lot that we play with, and it has changed a lot since sort of the 70s, where you had maybe a radio button on the steering wheel. Now we even have a drinks button. So we don't, we're not capable of drinking and sucking through a straw. We actually have a button that pumps liquid into our mouth.
Ron, you've talked about bold decisions and what it takes, and almost ripping up the rule book. There we have the McLaren P1. Just tell us how you've applied it to that.
Well, it's really, it's not surprising that any program like this is geared initially to the supply and demand equation. And when you bring so much technology into a vehicle, the cost is no less than if you're going to make thousands, but it has to have so many USPs. It's got to just make commercial sense. You then look at the market. You're faced with how many do we make? Anyway, we ended up making 375 of these vehicles, and then you'd say, well, why? And the answer is because this is actually a form of advertising budget. We are showing the world. We believe yet again, time will prove us to be right or wrong, but we think this is going to be the fastest car in the world. It has 1,000 horsepower and 200 cc's of CO2 output, which is just unheard of. That's achieved through a very ingenious and partially revolutionary hybrid system, which eliminates all of the turbo lag that you normally get when you're talking about low volume, high revving, turbocharged engine. And then it goes on and on. It's got remarkable braking system. It generates 600 kilos of downforce at 150 miles an hour, which is unheard of for a production car. That's like a Le Mans car. Can corner over 2G. And really, whilst this is very much collectible, it is completely drivable, 25 kilometers range, electric, 100 plus miles an hour electric, and everything automatically kicks in and out, and full aerodynamic control, all again covered by electronics. So a remarkable vehicle, but most definitely it is a brand statement for us. And if you're privileged enough to be able to afford to buy one and can get one because the demand exceeds the supply, then you've got something that's an appreciating asset, which are not many things that you buy in these days that actually appreciates, but that's the nature of this vehicle and this business proposition.
And Nick, just finally, we were talking about Formula One glamour, data, adaptation. You have a pair of trainers.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the proof of this theory, which is that the way we work with Nike and what we've talked a lot about today is about teamwork. The way we work with them and across all their different agencies, Wieden and Kennedy, RGA, AKQA and Mindshare, is about working together in a different style of teamwork to create a new campaign. I think the last campaign we had for the Olympics was 24,000 ads, 950,000 community users and about 3 million app downloads. And that happened because we worked on a new style of collaborative team, very much in the same way that McLaren do, and hopefully to similarly high standards. I guess there's a similarity and a difference. One is that I guess we feel it in our bum as well, in terms of interpreting the data. But I think probably if you're a data scientist at Mindshare, it's slightly more glamorous than being a Formula One driver. But that's the one big difference.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for all your fascinating insights. To Jenson Button, Ron Dennis, John Allert from McLaren, and from Mindshare, Nick Emery.
Thank you.
So before you all dash off, for any media in the audience, you can feel free to join us from 3 p.m. That's in the press centre at Speaker's Corner. And to everyone who came along here, thank you so much for taking the time. And for those of you watching online, thanks for your company. Goodbye.
Big round of applause for Lee Mackenzie from McLaren, please. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. And of course to Mindshare and to the Vodafone McLaren Mercedes team.